I'm Michael Goodson, Chief Curator and Director of Programming for the Contemporary Dayton, and today we're speaking with Nina Chanel Abney. Combining imaginative figuration and formal abstraction, Nina Chanel Abney's works push to the fore popular culture's fraught and often fevered cadence. In doing so, she also delves into ideas related to race, religion, art history, sex, and gender. Still, even when working at monumental scale, the works are balanced and nuanced, with a narrative, though often out of the realm of the normative, are followable and compelling. Royal Flush at the Nasher Museum of Art in North Carolina was her first major museum installation, and that traveled to the Chicago Cultural Center and then jointly to Los Angeles's Institute of Contemporary Art and the African American Museum in LA. She was part of the very, very important American exhibition, 30 Americans, which traveled the United States for a decade, imparting vital information and essentially changing the way museums thought and, importantly, behaved. Her last exhibition at Jack Shainman Gallery, The Great Escape, offered up ideas of bucolic autonomy in 2020 during the time of COVID and the tumult of that time. She is in major, numerous museum collections and is considered one of the arbiters of her medium in contemporary culture. I'd like to welcome Nina Chanel Abney. Hi, Nina.
Hi.
How are you today?
Pretty good.
Good. I wanted to start by thanking you for the exhibition. It has been incredibly well received here, and I'm amazed by the flow of people that have come to look at the work, and by the reaction that we're getting just by and large from those who sort of are in its presence. And I really do think you need to be in the presence of these paintings, and when people are, they are pretty consistently amazed. I also wanted to start today with just kind of the tropish, maybe autobiographical information, and ask you where you were born and where you grew up.
Okay, I was born in Harvey, Illinois, which is about, I don't know, about 45 minutes south of Chicago. So that's where I was born and grew up most of my childhood. And then maybe right before high school, I moved to another suburb that was not too far away, but that's pretty much where I grew up and spent all of my time there outside of college, and then eventually came to New York.
Can I ask you what your first significant experience with art was?
I'm just trying to think. My earliest memory would probably be my first field trip to the Art Institute of Chicago and seeing two very monumental paintings that always stuck out since then, which was, it was a Chuck Close painting that was in the collection, and um, the Sunday, a Sunday afternoon on the island of Grand Jat by SARA that was in the collection, and those like blew me away. I mean, I haven't seen that painting again since. I haven't really been able to go visit again, but I imagine it's smaller than I thought. But as a kid, it seemed like it took the space of the entire wall. So those were, I think, my standout like first experience with art.
That's the great good fortune of growing up near Chicago, I would assume. You have one of the most incredible museums in the world to have your first field trip at. I'm also really kind of curious about your experience at Augusta College and how that prepared you for Pratt and for New York, which I'm assuming is probably where major changes took place in the way you thought about making work?
Well, yeah, I went to it's called Augustana College, is in the Quad
Augustana,
Cities.
my apologies.
That it borders like between Iowa and Illinois. So I had an interesting experience because I initially went there to major in computer science. So I was actually a double major in computer science and fine art with somehow the intention of becoming a graphic, actually a graphic designer. I still painted in school because of my classes, but I hadn't really thought, as far as like becoming a professional fine artist. Um, so once I graduated, I took a year off. Actually applied to Parsons initially for graphic design, um, and then I think I took, after taking time off, actually probably getting a few reject letters for graphic design programs, I finally had the epiphany that I would apply for an MFA in fine arts. So then I end up actually having to reach back to some of my professors at Augustana to help me, put together my application.
Was Augustana, is it an art school primarily?
No, not at all. It's a liberal arts college.
I'm kind of curious if when you were in New York in grad school, if that's where you kind of realized you were an artist.
I think so. I mean, I feel like I was very intimidated when I first got to grad school in New York. I didn't know anyone when I moved here. And though I had been to like a few local shows back in Illinois and had went to the Art Institute of Chicago, I had never experienced like the big, contemporary art scene. So it was like a huge education for me once I came to New York. So I knew I wanted to be an artist. I wasn't quite sure if I had what it took when I first got in grad school, but I kept persisting.
In looking at the early work, and that would include work that is not long after leaving your MFA program, even though the work has changed a lot, in my estimation, in 10 years, what's remained pretty consistent is what most people read as this sort of art historical underpinning. And what's interesting about that to me is how it's not an easy thing to pin down. There's so much art historically going on in every painting that it becomes this kind of amalgam, this swirling amalgam of not just references, because I think references is too, semantically, it's just not the way it works. It seems to embody more kind of the whole of art history. And I'm curious how that works for you and what your thoughts on that are, and when you became, I guess, really conscious of it.
I once read some book about like how to become an artist, which was like to take in all of these influences and then forget them. So I feel like I try to like somewhere have it in the side of my mind that all these influences, and I'm always saving pictures from artworks that I like come across or all kinds of things, but somehow when I'm in the studio, I can't think about it and it has to just naturally flow out. I mean, I even think about at one point, specific point on some works I was working on, I was kind of working in the vein of Stuart Davis prior to even knowing his work at all, so sometimes those like weird coincidences occur also in an artist's practice. But I mean, I like to see my work as kind of like a accumulation of like all of the references that I'm interested in over time.
Yeah, Stuart Davis and Cole Scott came up as well when the first time I was standing in front of the work in our galleries with a group of students who had clearly taken a couple art history classes. And then what we started doing was started dissecting every other art historical reference we could in the painting, and it just seemed to go on and on and on, and again became an entity of it in and of itself in the read of the painting. That seems more akin to the paintings you've done in the last, say, 5 years than the earlier paintings. And I'm curious about the shift that's occurred in your paintings, say, some of the paintings that are represented in Royal Flush, which kind of operates as a trajectory of your career, in part. But certainly the work that was in 30 Americans, and kind of where those changes occurred for you and how consciously they occurred, and maybe in reaction to what?
I think it's a combination between like an intentional shift and, but also just my personal growth as a person, as an artist, and what I became interested in. I think coming right out of grad school, I was still trying to figure out my own personal aesthetic and trying to like feel like I was breaking out of this way of tradition, like working more in a traditional way, and what I had learned maybe in undergrad, it being a liberal arts school that wasn't really teaching much about contemporary art. So I think what you see is a transition of me kind of shifting to what I would feel like would be like just my organic way of working, like my natural way of working. So kind of you could see me unlearning certain things, or me attempting to paint, like render something more realistic, which, you know, how I was brought up was like the example of being a good artist, you know, if you can make
Yeah.
something look exactly, you know. So and also the idea of like a definitive narrative, I always felt like I was fighting against within my work, and wanted it to encompass more than one meaning, and find a way for the viewer to come up with meaning and a personal connection rather than me than feed them like this is what the painting means. So I think that's kind of where me wanting to work a little more abstractly kind of came into the work. And now I'm at a completely different spot that I was probably in those paintings in like 2008.
Yeah, the way the paintings have changed is really fascinating to me, because I love both kinds of the ways you work, but these new paintings, especially the ones really from the last 3 years, and certainly the ones that were in the last New York show, seemed like this leap forward, like you really understood what it is you were doing and the way you wanted to. They sort of exude a kind of confidence that really wins people over immediately. And I think it's really different to be in the room with them. That's when I felt it. When we hung the 3 8x8 paintings that are in our exhibition, it was everyone sort of just stopped, and you know, it basically, they owned the room, and to a certain degree, in doing so, they owned for a few minutes our time, if that makes any sense. I kind of wanted to talk with you a little bit about your practice, I guess with regard to these new works, but really in general. I've had students come in and some other painters come in from really all over, from Chicago and from Cincinnati, and a couple of people from New York, who have at one time or another used spray paint either as their major medium or an ancillary medium, or the medium which got them started in terms of making work. And they're all kind of astonished by the restraint and the control, and still the spirit of experimentation that exists in your works with regard to spray paint. And I'm curious when that started with you, and if all those things I just described are things that you feel on a regular basis when you're making the work.
So it's a good friend and artist named Charlie Roberts that used to show at a Kravitz Wavy Gallery with me several years ago. And he was painting with like acrylics, but also using spray paint. And it just seemed so much fun. And it allowed him a little bit more freedom than just, than using a brush. So I slowly tried it, wanted to try it myself. And I mean, realized that I can't, I'm not actually so great holding a spray paint can and just like creating a whole mural on the wall. Like I definitely cannot do that. But it was exciting for me to figure out how I can use this material, but use it in a way that lends itself well to my own practice. So to learn how to use spray paint for myself really meant me almost like abandoning the paintbrush completely and finding new tools to create lines and new ways to just create, shapes and forms.
Yeah, there are moments where you can see the really skilled use of taping and spraying through some sort of template or stencil. It's in the repetition of those marks that are really, really reduced marks. Like, for instance, there's a melon of some kind in one of the paintings that's clearly you spraying what appears to be freehand and also the use of a stencil. But I love to look at that melon just because of the translucency, the level of translucency that you chose. And it really does become kind of the epicenter of this kind of massive swirling event of that painting. It kind of gives me a little joy every time I walk in the gallery. My habit is to go to that painting if I'm not in some sort of frenetic rush and just sort of take it in. But I would also say, like, just the way that butts are rendered in these paintings is really fascinating to me, because it's like, it's the same 2 or 3 lines, but they're dead on, and they're really balanced and enjoyable to see, and again, it's like it's both the translucency of the line and the opacity of the line simultaneously. I'm kind of curious about, I've had these arguments with what kind of spray paint you're using, and I know nothing about spray paint in that realm, but I have talked to people who use spray a lot, and the general call is that it's probably Montana or something like that. And I'm curious if you would divulge, just for the sake of argument, if that's primarily what you
I
use.
use like 4 different kinds of spray paints. For me, it's simply about what colors I need or I can find when I'm going to the store, or because the stencils I use are all hand cut out of paper. So I also have to find the right spray paint that's not going to layer too much where I can't keep reusing the stencil, So, but
Yeah.
primarily it's about whatever color. I think I have one in the studio. The brand is called Sugar. I have used Montana. It's another one I use. I don't even recall the name, but I have like several different kinds. It's really primarily about what colors I need at the time and what I can get at the store.
Yeah, that's actually, it'll be good to have that resolved the next time I talk to this guy, because he's so certain that you use a specific spray paint. I actually wanted to talk with you a little bit about scale as well. You've used scale with a kind of ease and confidence, and it's still overwhelming. So in a really general sense, what is your relationship to scale? You've made so many large paintings, and this particular show and The Great Escape as well had an incredible range in size. There's a small painting of cut flowers that is just really has about 14 distinct little gestures in it, but then right next to it we've hung a very large painting that exhibits the same comfort, confidence, and ease. What's your relationship to scale, generally speaking?
I mean, I realize like my comfort zone is working as large as possible. I think it just gives me, I guess, more room to play, so to speak. Like, I'm actually very uncomfortable working at a smaller scale. So this last show, I wanted to challenge myself to have more of a range and like more focus. Like the smaller paintings are supposed to be more like, snapshots. Um, but yeah, I mean, I've always enjoyed looking at large paintings in the museums and just it just feels like you have more room to create a world.
Yeah, it seems as though a lot of people really enjoy what they'll call a humble painting, and I think it's the size of the painting that dictates what they'll delineate as humble or not humble. But there really is a deep tradition of monumental painting, and I kind of see you as part of that tradition, the keeper of it, even, if you will. And the thing that I think that also facilitates is narrative within the paintings, which you also seem to have a kind of comfort and confidence with, even though, any given person's going to read the narrative of painting a different way. So the narrative of the paintings in The Great Escape all seem to allude to this kind of, true to its title, escape to the bucolic during a pretty rough time, a time when most of us were isolated and not leaving our apartments, it seemed. And I'm kind of curious if you were actually experiencing that, or whether it was an invention for you as the overall narrative of that show.
I think it was real lived experience and just feeling so overwhelmed between everything that was going on at that time that, I'm just like, almost felt exhausted. So I just start to like go out for bike rides and take trips upstate and just experience more nature. But also just thinking about, I perceived possibly an expectation of what I would do next because I'm always responding to, what's going on in the world at the moment in a particular way. And so I thought like everyone would think I would go in one direction with my exhibition. And I'm always also about the element of surprise and doing the opposite. So I, that also drove me going in that direction as well. But I don't know. I almost felt like it was just timely to like focus on, I guess, something that didn't seem so heavy at that time.
Yeah, it was an incredible exhibition, and it was one of the last I saw in New York before I was completely. It was actually my first foray out after about a year of being stuck with my feral children and not leaving the house. And I actually saw a lot of dour work in New York during that time. People were responding, first of all, with very small works, because I'm assuming they were working at home. And then works that were, in one way or the other, sometimes very successfully, speaking to kind of, again, the tumult of that moment. And then I walk into Jack Shainman, and there was this other dialogue going on. It was utterly unexpected. And I think it was the moment I knew I was going to ask if we might show some of these works. So, I mean, we're now, we were anyway, in April, seemingly on the cusp of normalcy, and now it seems to be sliding back and forth. And even today, there was political dialogue about how we handle the rate of vaccination and how we move forward. And I'm kind of curious about how that's affecting how you're working now, and what are you working on now, and how is the work going?
Well, I'm actually working on a fairly large exhibition that will show in Australia next month. Kind of part of a group of artists that were asked to kind of respond to the works of Matisse. So that's kind of what I'm working on right now. I mean, I've actually been able to do more public work in the last month or so. I did 2 different public pieces. But I mean, I think in general, after being on lockdown, it kind of opened up my mind to like how I can create work in different ways. So I had experimented in AR. I mean, I will continue to work on more commercial projects and things that just don't feel so limited to the gallery space, thinking about people being outside. And so I think that's kind of the direction I'm in after I finish up this exhibition, maybe some public sculpture, I'm not sure, but I'm just, I think it opened up my creativity in a way where I want to experiment more with different mediums.
Yeah, I really actually love what I would deem the public works, the murals, and some of the sculpture, in part because you really seem to thread the needle between that which immediately is enjoyable and sates people, but also immediately challenges them. And I would say in the manifestation in The Great Escape was the fluidity of gender and the fluidity of race. Was for a lot of people that saw the works, for instance, that were in our show, initially kind of jarring, yet they were also sated by the paintings formally. I'm kind of curious about that juggling act within any given painting for you, and especially of late, where those issues seem to be coming more and more to the fore. And I would first ask, do you think that's a correct call, that they're coming more and more to the fore? Or really our perceptions are changing during this kind of hectic time?
I think maybe it's both, Another thing about just the last couple of years, I think it allowed people to sit and be more reflective and kind of realize some of the world issues and things and, that we have been grappling with. And so I don't know. I feel like it's a combination of both. I feel like all these things have already been in the world forever, from all the things that maybe have boiled over in the forefront of our attention because we were forced to pay attention. But, they were, all these things already existed.
Yeah, and I think the thing I love about those really, really large works, even if they are actually proper paintings and not, public murals, is that people like to feel enveloped by things, and I think that they do that really, really skillfully. But again, it's that balancing act of it's a few things. It's in this feeling of being enveloped in the painting, which is tangentially about being comforted by the painting, but at the same time, those things that envelop you can also make you uncomfortable. And I think there's this percentage of what's going on in any given painting, any given narrative of any given painting, that is about discomfort as well. And sometimes that's done formally, but often it's content. And I'm curious about how you're pushing that content now, and especially with these works that are potentially public works. And maybe where that comes from. Where does that content come from,
Yeah. I think as far as like that push and pull between hopefully having the viewer be drawn to the work, but simultaneously maybe kind of pushing back a little bit is just something I guess I learned to deal with and think about early on in my work. As I mean, it all started with me going to exhibitions of other artists that might have been very straightforwardly talking about, you know, race and other like hot topics, so to speak, and seeing how one would look at the work and kind of just glance at it and feel like it's not for them or whatever. And you know, I was like, well, how do I get people kind of to stay in front of this work, you know, and deal with it, or even reflect enough to find their own place in it? Because unfortunately, it's like for a lot of Black contemporary artists, like if we are, you know, if it's Black figures on the work, maybe other people will feel like, oh, this work isn't for me for whatever reason. But it's more of about a human experience. And, you know, for me, creating work that lends itself well for everyone to kind of see, you know, their place in the overall world, you know. So that's where that kind of push and pull started. Um, as far as like the content for my public works, it's kind of like it's a fine line and a dance of like what I might do in a museum exhibition or a gallery exhibition where I have like completely free reign to push the boundaries. You know, what some of the public works is a little more politics, you know, if I'm working on someone else's facility. And so it's kind of like a fine line of like how I
Yeah.
can, you know, have the balance. But also, you know, sometimes, you know, it's a time and place for the content I might have in one show, and another show might just be something pleasant to look at, you know? So the public work also allows me that freedom too, to maybe if I just want to focus on just purely visuals, void of content, you know? And then location. So it's like a case by case basis. Like some things, some public works, I definitely took in the location for content and thinking about the things that happened in that area to intentionally create the imagery. But other ones are just, you know, purely just visual, you know.
Yeah, and there is also a measure of joy in everything, and I'll tell you, one of the decisions we made as we were hanging the show, because we had this painting called Thirsty initially placed with other works, and then it occurred to me as we were hanging it that the event of that work, the event depicted in that work was pretty monumental, even though the painting is not so large. And we thought we actually ended up building out a wall much larger, specifically to center that work on, so that this monumental moment, the breastfeeding of a child, had this space that denoted its importance. And I think that's one of the things about your work that I think I have come to love so much, is that you know, even in swirling events, in very crowded, monumentally sized paintings, you're aware of the importance of each of these moments. It's incredible to see. I wanted to end our conversation with a question about 30 Americans, and I think it's primarily because I saw 30 Americans kind of into the run of the show, maybe 3 years in, and I can't even remember where. But then was lucky enough, I happened to be in Philadelphia at the Barnes for the last iteration of that show. And I waited in line a long time to see the show that day, because I think everyone was aware that this was the last moments of a really, really important exhibition that really changed the way a lot of people thought about not just art, but about institutions. And what was it like to be part of that exhibition?
Um, I mean, it was almost beyond like explanation. That exhibition I feel like kicked off in 2008, and that was almost only like 1 year after I first started showing. So it was almost overwhelming because I was just, reading about all the artists I was exhibiting with, and like even I was going to be MYCHAELYN's studio assistant almost a year and a half before. So to come full circle and then be, showing alongside of like a lot of the artists that I admire and in conversation with them was just, like one of my great art experiences.
Yeah, I'll actually give credit to MYCHAELYN. I did a MYCHAELYN Thomas show at the Wexner Center when I was the curator there. It was kind of a large show. And we talked about your work, and I remember her sort of taking pause to say, there's somebody you should really think about showing. And I think that kind of planted the seed for me, although the seed was likely planted with the first time I saw 30 Americans, even though the work has changed so much in the interim. But again, I wanted to thank you not only for all this incredible work that you've put into the world, but for we're a relatively fledgling small gallery, and I think you understood the importance of showing this work, especially in a town like Dayton, Ohio, that is pretty racially divided, and we're looking to speak to the people, the citizens of this city, sort of ubiquitously, and I think you understood that, and I am forever grateful for that, and I certainly appreciate it. It was kind of you.
I was saying no problem, thank you. Because I am from the Midwest, I understand the importance of just having access to certain artists and art that you might not, normally you wouldn't. I mean, at least I feel like it's maybe a little better now than when I was like 20 years ago when I was looking for contemporary
Yeah.
artists. But like, then the opportunity to be exposed to maybe like, some Kahinde or Kara Walker or whatever, like all the artists I learned when I got to New York, to have had access to that, in the Midwest would have probably completely even maybe changed my trajectory, like I've maybe been on a different path with my
Yeah.
work. But so yeah, no, thank you for the opportunity.
Well, the show did both of those things, I would say. There have been several groups of students that have come in. Colleges reopened here about a month ago, and there were painting professors that immediately started marching 20 and 30 people at a time through this exhibition. And those that knew the work and knew who you were it was like going to an amusement park. And for the others, it was a revelation. And we certainly thank you for providing that for us. And the work is beautiful.
Thank you. It's been great.
Thanks a lot. I really appreciate it.